Holy shit. What is it? Oh god. I'll never forget the first time I discovered Slenderman. It was 2013. I was hunched over my shitty Acer laptop at 2 a.m. absolutely terrified out of my little 10-year-old mind. I was unable to look away from a YouTube video of a funny Swedish man screaming at a video game. I was terrified, but I was also hooked. I needed Slenderman the way Chester Stone needed Newports.
Your Newports, Nick!
I was obsessed about the tall, faceless man. I needed to know everything about him. Was he real? Were the tales of the Grossman in the Black Forest of Germany real? What happens when he gets you? Who or what really is a Slenderman? Why are we here? Just to suffer? These questions plagued my preteen mind. My friends at recess were annoyed because all I wanted to do was talk about Slender. Because of my obsession, I got my first sleep paralysis experience. It was of the man himself, standing over me while I slept. I was unable to move, and the fear felt so real. That's the magic of early internet horror. It took on a life of its own, seeped into my real life, and evolved into something that kept me up for weeks. I slept in my parents' room for a long time after that. True story. While we have plenty of modern internet horror content like the Mandela Catalogue, Local 58, and the Monument Mythos, among a whole sea of others, something fundamental has changed in how we tell scary stories online. We've come a long way from those early forum posts, but somewhere along the way, we forgot our roots. There's something special about that era of internet horror that we need to talk about, the Slenderverse. The early 2010s marked a pivotal moment in online storytelling, where a simple forum post about a tall, faceless entity spawned one of the most ambitious collaborative horror projects in internet history. What began as a creepypasta quickly evolved into something far more significant, a sprawling universe of interconnected narratives that would fundamentally change how we approach horror storytelling in the digital age. Today, we're examining why the Slenderverse represents a unique moment in internet culture that modern analog horror, despite its technical sophistication and polish, hasn't quite managed to replicate. We're going to talk about what happened when a group of random people from all over the world worked together to create something truly terrifying. This isn't about nostalgia. It's about understanding how spontaneous, community-driven storytelling created something that even today's most well-crafted horror series struggle to achieve. I'm hoping that through examining the key differences in the Slenderverse and analog horror, we'll explore how these projects laid the groundwork for modern internet horror while possessing qualities that have become increasingly rare in today's more structured landscape. The story of the Slenderverse is, in many ways, a story of how internet horror and the internet in general grew up, for better and for worse. The Slenderverse wasn't just some random horror series you'd watch and forget about. No, this was something completely different. What made it so special? The fans weren't just watching, they were part of the story. Think about it like this. Every time you watched a video, you weren't just a viewer, you were basically a detective. People would spend hours freeze-framing videos, analyzing weird sounds in the background, and trying to figure out what those cryptic tweets meant. And here's the crazy part. The creators were watching right back, taking the best fan theories and working them into the actual story. Do you remember Marble Hornets? When fans started spotting these weird symbols in the backgrounds of videos, the creators didn't just ignore it. They took those symbols and made them a huge part of the story. That's what made this thing feel so real. The fans were literally helping to write the story as it happened. But it didn't stop there. Fans went absolutely wild with this stuff. They made their own videos, artwork, and even entire blogs that added to the story. Some of these fan creations were so good, they basically became unofficial parts of the story. That's how deep this rabbit hole went. And the real magic, it was happening in real time on forums and in comment sections. People would team up to crack codes, analyze the story to audio, and piece together these these insane timelines. And get this, the creators would actually hide important plot points in corrupted frames or background noise, knowing that the community would work together to find them. Fast forward to today's analog horror, and it's just not the same anymore. Don't get me wrong, the production value is through the roof, but creators now just hand you everything on a silver platter. There's no mystery anymore, no need to dig deeper. Sure, they might throw in some Easter eggs here and there, but it's not the same as finding something that actually changes the whole story. Back then, every new video felt like a new piece of evidence in some huge conspiracy. You weren't just watching content, you were investigating it. For example, in EverymanHybrid's box test video, Founds found actual coordinates hidden in a video that led to real physical locations. People were driving across the country to find USB drives and documents that contained crucial parts of the story. How insane is that? Or how about when Marble Hornets dropped the infamous To the Ark cipher in entry 26? The whole community was stumped for weeks until the creator, Troy Wagner, started dropping hints and helping the community on Twitter. That's the kind of stuff that kept people hooked. How cool is that? Why don't we do stuff like this anymore? Look at modern analog horror. Sure, it looks prettier and the stories are more polished, but the wall between creator and audience is solid. You can theorize all you want, but at the end of the day, you're just along for the ride. And that's the real problem with modern analog horror. It's lost that special sauce that made the Slenderverse feel so alive. Yeah, it might look better on paper, but it feels more like watching a TV show than being a part of something bigger. The Slenderverse wasn't just a series, it was a living, breathing world that we all helped to create. Back then, Twitter wasn't just some promotional tool for the Slenderverse, it was actually part of the story itself. Back in the early 2010s, creators used Twitter in ways that modern analog horror series can only dream of. Every major character had their own Twitter account. They weren't just boring promo accounts either, they were actively posting, interacting, and freaking people out in real time. Imagine scrolling through your feed and suddenly seeing a character from EverymanHybrid posting about something terrifying happening to them right now. That's next level immersion. And the best part, these accounts would actually respond to fans in character and post updates about what was happening and even interact with characters from other series. It wasn't just some scheduled content. It was like this stuff was happening live, making you feel like you were watching a real horror story unfold. Here's an example of that. There was a time when Jay from Marble Hornets tweeted that he was checking out some abandoned building. Hours later, Tim's account frantically warned him to get out. Then out of nowhere, EverymanHybrid drops these mysterious coordinates with the message, "You're getting closer." Jay's account went dark for 2 whole days after that. When the next video finally dropped, we got to see what actually went down during those missing 48 hours. That's the kind of stuff that would keep us on the edge of our seats. And when characters would disappear in their story, Twitter accounts would go silent too, sometimes for weeks or for months. When they finally came back, tweets would be all messed up and corrupted. People would literally spend hours refreshing these accounts, knowing the next tweet could reveal something huge. Modern analog horror just doesn't do this anymore. Sure, the videos look prettier now, but they don't really use social media in the same way. It's lost that feeling of something scary happening right now in real time. And don't get me wrong, these series are incredibly well made. This is not a hit piece against modern analog horror. But when was the last time you checked the Monument Mythos Twitter account at 3 AM and found some cryptic message that made you question reality? You haven't, because that's not how they operate. These shows are designed to be binged on YouTube, not experienced in real time across multiple platforms. And here's the thing, when you watch today's analog horror, you're just watching a show. Back in the Slenderverse days, you were living the horror story. Every time you open Twitter, you might find some new terrifying development, not just another scheduled upload. We're talking real unexpected scares. And the genius of it all, the horror wasn't just in videos anymore. It was right there in your Twitter feed, mixed in with your daily life. Modern analog horror might look fancy, but it's never managed to blur the lines between fiction and reality quite like the Slenderverse did. One of the most striking differences between the Slenderverse and modern analog horror lies in their approach to narrative development. The Slenderverse's organic, evolved storytelling method created something that planned narratives rarely achieve: genuine unpredictability and community co-creation. In the Slenderverse, creators often started with basic narrative frameworks, but allowed the story to develop naturally based on audience interaction, theories, and unexpected creative opportunities. When viewers discovered something interesting or developed compelling theories, creators could incorporate these elements into the story. This created a dynamic where the narrative felt alive, constantly growing, and adapting. This organic approach tied directly into the community engagement we discussed earlier. When viewers noticed a particular symbol or pattern, creators would expand on it. When the theory gained traction, the story could pivot to explore that avenue. This flexibility allowed for deeper, more meaningful audience investment because the community could see their impact in the narrative in real time. The Twitter interactions we examined were a perfect example of this organic storytelling. Creators could respond to audience reactions immediately, adjust the narrative direction based on engagement and create authentic suspense because even they weren't entirely sure where the story might lead. In contrast, modern analog horror series typically arrived with predetermined storylines, carefully plotted story beats, and planned endings. While this approach certainly produces polished, coherent narratives, it loses the electric uncertainty and collaborative spirit that made the Slenderverse so compelling. When everything is planned in advance, there's less room for the kind of spontaneous creativity that led to some of the Slenderverse's most memorable moments. Take the Mandela Catalogue, for example. When fans started theorizing about the connections between alternates and biblical angels, creator Alex Kister had to explicitly state on Twitter that there wasn't one, that the story was planned out differently. Compare this to how Marble Hornets incorporated fan theories about the operators' symbols meeting into their narrative. That's the difference between rigid, pre-planned storytelling and organic narrative development. Look at Monument Mythos. While it's well made and all that, creator Alex Casanas had the entire story mapped out from the beginning. When fans came up with fascinating theories about the corner folks' true nature, they ultimately had to be dismissed because they didn't fit into the predetermined plot. The Slenderverse would have run with these theories, weaving them into the evolving narrative. The organic nature of the Slenderverse's storytelling also meant that the creators could adapt to real-world limitations or opportunities. If an actor became unavailable, their character's disappearance could become a part of the mystery. If an unexpected filming location presented itself, the story could shift to incorporate it. The adaptability created a sense of authenticity that perfectly matched the found footage aesthetic these series were aiming for. Perhaps most importantly, organic narratives allowed for failure, experimentation, and recovery. Not every story beat worked, not every theory pan out, but the fluid nature of the storytelling meant that creators could learn from these moments and adjust accordingly. This created a more authentic human experience that modern analog horror, with its polished perfection, lacks severely. The way the Slenderverse created fear hits different compared to modern analog horror, and they're missing that special something that made the Slenderverse so terrifying. Picture this, you're scrolling through Twitter late at night and suddenly one of the characters posts about hearing weird noises outside their house. Then silence, hours go by, nothing, until BAM! At 3 AM, they upload this distorted, creepy video showing exactly what happened. That's the kind of stuff that kept you up at night, because you never knew when or where the next scare was coming from. Compare that to modern analog horror. It's simply too predictable. You know exactly when the next episode is dropping, exactly how long it'll be. It's like watching a really polished TV show instead of experiencing something truly scary. And here's what made the Slenderverse even creepier: those long periods of silence. When a character suddenly stopped posting, you had no idea if it was part of the story or something that actually went wrong behind the scenes. That uncertainty, that was pure gold for horror. Most analog horror takes place in the past or an alternate universe or something, but the Slenderverse, that was happening right now, like literally right now as you were living your life. Imagine checking your phone during lunch break and seeing some terrifying update from a character. Look at Local 58. It's a great series and all that, but when's the last time you felt any real suspense when the next episode would drop? The creator literally had to
address it on Reddit.
In the Slenderverse, those gaps would have been part of the story. No more midnight updates about someone going to explore an abandoned building. No more cryptic coordinates leading to real locations. It's all just content now. The best part about the Slenderverse was the community wasn't just watching, they were part of it. Something scary would happen and everyone would immediately jump online to the forums, sharing theories and freaking out together. Their reactions could actually change what happened in the story. Analog horror does not have that same influence. That's the difference. We get well-polished episodes where everything is perfect and we get the planned out storytelling, but in exchange for all that shine, we lost that raw, genuine, immersive fear that made the Slenderverse feel so real. Worst trade deal in the history of trade deals. Let's talk about how production values have changed from the Slenderverse days to modern analog horror, and how we've definitely lost something along the way. Back in the day, Slenderverse content was rough around the edges. We're talking shaky cameras, bad audio, weird lighting, but here's the thing, those weren't bugs, they were features, and it all just worked. When Marble Hornets caught something creepy on their low-res camera, those imperfections actually made it feel more real. Fast forward to today, and analog horror is all scripted and feels fake. Sure, we got those visual effects, the sound design, and high-res footage that's been artificially made to look old. It looks good, but sometimes it's just too perfect, you know what I mean? In most of these modern analog horror series, they have accidental broadcasting errors. They're so perfectly timed and placed that they might as well have a spotlight on them. Compare that to when EverymanHybrid's camera would genuinely malfunction during an encounter. That raw, unplanned chaos was scarier than any carefully crafted digital distortion. And let's talk about those errors for a second. In the Slenderverse, when something glitched out, it was because, well, something actually glitched out. Now, every static effect, every distortion is meticulous meticulously planned. Sure, sometimes it looks cool, but it feels more like watching a movie than actual found footage. Modern creators can do some pretty incredible things. Complex visuals, hidden details, consistent quality throughout their series. But there's always a trade-off. These days, you're always aware you're watching something that's been carefully crafted. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? The Slenderverse might look amateur to what we have now, but those technical limitations, they make everything feel more authentic. Sometimes, less really is more. Or at least that's what my girlfriend tells me. Though I have to admit, it's not all the creators' fault. Social media has completely changed the game for online horror storytelling. Back in the Slenderverse days, platforms were way simpler. No algorithms, no complicated feeds, just pure unfiltered content. And you know what? That actually made the horror way more effective. Think about Twitter, for example. Back then, tweets showed up in order right when they were posted. If a character tweeted about being chased by something scary, you see it immediately. But nowadays, that tweet might get buried under a bunch of recommended posts. And don't even get me started on YouTube. These days, creators have to worry about upload schedules, video length, and keeping the algorithm happy. The Slenderverse didn't care about any of that. They could drop a terrifying video at any time of night because something just happened and it worked perfectly. And let's talk about TikTok. Sure, it's great for quick scares and jump cuts, but can you imagine trying to build the slow, creeping dread of the Slenderverse in 60 seconds or less? And the biggest problem, we're all too smart for our own good now. Everyone knows how content is made, how effects work, and how stories are structured. Back in the Slenderverse era, there was still some mystery about what was real and what wasn't. Now, good luck convincing someone that your perfectly edited found footage is actually real. Modern analog horror has gotten really lazy, and it's simply just not that scary. Every single show follows the exact same playbook: mysterious old tapes, creepy corporations, and educational videos gone wrong. And let's not forget those weird distorted messages. You can literally set your watch to these shows. First comes the innocent intro video, everything's fine and dandy, then, oh wait, did you see that glitch? Next thing you know, the PNG starts stretching and looking real creepy, and boom, somehow we're in cosmic horror territory. It's gotten so predictable that there are memes about it. Compare this to the old Slenderverse. Those creators were out there taking risks, trying new things, and letting their stories go wild. They weren't afraid to experiment, but modern analog horror, they've got their little formula all mapped out, with their spooky moments scheduled in like a train timetable to make sure you're engaged and you don't get bored. Let's be real, these new shows look like they came from the same YouTube tutorial. The fake VHS effects, the perfect aspect ratios, those fancy corporate logos, it's all too clean and it's all too perfect. Analog horror is also terrible at building up dread. You watch the video, you know that the PNG is going to stretch and that a spooky distorted sound is going to play, and that's it. In the Slenderverse, the tension and dread would build up slowly. You would maybe notice something in the distance. The characters would have no clue, but you could see it. They would explore an abandoned building or something, and when an encounter did happen, it was terrifying. And that's a real tragedy here. The Slenderverse kept you on your toes. Anything could happen at any time, but modern analog horror, it's traded all that excitement and uncertainty for a safe, predictable formula that looks good but is not scary at all. Something else to consider is the fact that modern analog horror just doesn't stick around like the Slenderverse did. Think about it. Slenderverse shows kept people hooked for years, but these new series, they're basically yesterday's news as soon as they drop. Nowadays, these new shows blow up for like a week, maybe two. Sure, you get your reaction videos, your theory posts, an iceberg video, and you might be covered by Wendigoon. Hi Wendigoon! But once everyone's figured out the obvious twists and symbols, people just move on. It's kind of sad, really. And you know what's crazy? It's not just because these shows are following a formula. It's because everything is so perfectly planned out, there is no room for mystery anymore. When creators map out every single detail beforehand, what's left for us, the community, to discover and theorize about? The Slenderverse wasn't just accidentally awesome. It lasted because they put real mystery and community first. And these new shows, they're like fast food horror. Looks great, tastes okay, but you'll forget about it as soon as you're done. I mean, besides thinking, wow, those VHS effects were pretty spooky, what else is there to remember? Let's be real here. Internet horror has lost its way. In chasing production values and algorithmic success, it sacrificed everything that made this genre genuinely terrifying. The Slenderverse wasn't just different, it was better. What we have now is a hollow imitation, a paint-by-numbers approach to horror that prioritizes looking good over being scary. Sure, the effects are prettier, the editing is smoother, and everything looks professional, but that's exactly the problem. Horror shouldn't be pretty or smooth or professional. It should be raw, unpredictable, and genuinely unsettling. The Slenderverse understood this. It doesn't need fancy VHS filters or perfectly timed jump scares. It had something much more powerful: authenticity, real community engagement, and genuine uncertainty. And most importantly, it wasn't afraid to break the rules and take risks. Until modern analog horror creators are willing to step away from their safe, formulaic approach and start taking real creative risks again, we're stuck with what amounts to aesthetic horror. All style, no substance. Internet horror needs to evolve, or maybe it needs to devolve, back to when it actually knew how to make people afraid. And that's it. That's my video. Thank you for watching, and if you watched the whole thing, thanks for sticking around. It means a lot. If this video made you think, please like and leave a comment on what your favorite Slenderverse series was, or leave a comment if you think I'm dumb and incorrect. I'd love to hear your opinions. Thanks for being here as always. Subscribe if you want to see more of these essay analyst type videos, or if you want to see something different, I'm doing a series on my channel where I review every Skyrim dungeon. Be sure to check that out if you're interested. That's it. Goodbye.